for the second. India have won the test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India home.
Hello and welcome to a new episode of the 81 All Out podcast. This is Siddhartha Vaidyanathan at Sidvi on Twitter. And today I'm delighted to have a special guest on the show, someone who's responsible for much of what you see on your TV screens when a cricket match is on, the ICC's executive producer of live events, Ajesh Ramachandran. A very warm welcome to the show, Ajesh. Nice to have you here.
Thanks. It's lovely to be here. I should just clarify that only responsible for ICC events, of course, not all the other cricket that you see.
Well,
I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing.
Well, okay, not all cricket, but the ICC events, which I must admit, on a personal note, are extremely watchable events. So Ajesh has my highest respect for that. Ajesh has been associated with cricket broadcasting for over 20 years, around 20 years. Between 2005 and 2015, he was the live producer of cricket matches during all ICC run events. And in the last 7 years, he has served as an executive producer for all major ICC event broadcasts. Ajesh does a job that I know very little about. I have been in the cricket business for myself for about 20 years now, but I speak to a lot of people about cricket and the various aspects of it. I know what a journalist does or an umpire does or what a groundsman does to a fair degree. But, a TV producer is something that is a novelty for me. So I'm hoping to be a student in this conversation as Professor Ajesh takes me through his job. So yes, Ajesh, just to start with, if you can give me and our listeners an idea of a typical day, for you, you have a match. I'm sure preparations start much earlier, but if you can just guide us through what happens from the producer's point of view. Of course, you can start with the executive producer and then move on to the live producer as well on a typical day of a match.
So typically, the work really starts with your venue inspections. I don't do them myself, but I have a team, and there is someone from the team who goes on these venue inspections and looks at the venue, sees if they are fit for purpose. Generally, there'll be a bit of building to do, a few temporary scaffolds here and there. On occasion, a commentary box as well, because you're always looking for a commentary space that is right behind the bowler's arm. So some grounds which are primarily not cricket grounds obviously don't cater to things like that. So the point of the venue inspection is to just make sure that everything is fit for when you arrive and have to broadcast games of cricket. After that, you'd sort of be looking at crewing. You'd need to look at what sort of kit you want to put for this event, and based on the objective of the tournament, what you're trying to achieve, really. That's how you plan your specs. Games of cricket now these days have up to as much as 35 cameras and a number of toys. So it just depends really what you want to do with that event. Sometimes you are, in certain cases, contractually bound to use certain specs. In other cases, you're trying to find what specs would be best for a particular event, taking everything into consideration. And based on that, you plan out each venue and where you're laying the infrastructure, your OB facilities and equipment partner would need to figure out things like cable runs and how far the broadcast control room is from the commentary box and to various positions. So there's a lot of figuring out of venues to be done. You also look at employing the right crew, the right number, firstly, and then the right people, obviously. Goes without saying. Similarly, you need to get a commentary panel in place. So you're looking at the event again. And you're also looking at sometimes at representation, at finding out the best people for the job, really, and looking at the kind of coverage that you want to produce. Once you have that in place, you start making your editorial plans. What is your specific match day going to look like? There is a look and feel that you need to sort of decide on, and you'll be working with your graphics company to sort of get the right graphics package for ICC events. We like everything to look a little joined up, so the sort of sub graphics of the event, the branding of the event that you see on the field is what you're likely to see reflected in the graphics package as well. We tend to make them colorful, and we look at younger audiences, and the point is always to try and get them interested. So something that would be attractive to as many people as possible, really. One of the things about an ICC TV broadcast is it's a world feed service. So essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to make the match coverage suit various tastes and sensibilities. It's not always the easiest thing. It's a one-size-fits-all sort of coverage. Viewers in the Indian subcontinent, and that by that I mean most of the viewers of our coverage, or indeed any cricket coverage, have a certain taste, and slightly more conservative audiences in other parts of the world have other tastes, and you do your best to sort of marry the two. You can't win always, but you try and do the best you can, and put a coverage out there that is suitable for everyone.
But I'm sure at a larger level, at a big picture level, you have a certain philosophy. And I notice, at least from a completely outsider's perspective, when watching ICC events, that it is a sort of a marriage between entertainment and journalism. Of course, there is a philosophical argument to be had about whether cricket is entertainment or whether it is not entertainment. But I see that there is a certain journalistic bent to the coverage, which is, of course, like the BBC of the earlier years, or the classic coverages from the past, and as well as melding it with sort of a modern entertainment-ish thing. Am I correct in assuming that? Is that a kind of a philosophy that drives it?
Yeah, spot on, really. What we try and do most of the time is move away from calling the game, just explaining what is happening, and then move into why things are happening. So that we find is a good way to play to the strength of the talent that we have as well. As you know, most of the commentary talent we have in this day and age are former players. That's a separate debate in itself, whether that is the right way for all time in the future. But at least that's the way things are now. A lot of this talent is very, very good at sort of explaining various things on the field of play that sometimes we miss as lay viewers. The more discerning amongst us will obviously have much better ideas, and I see a lot of that on Twitter, for instance. I do know that there is a taste for a lot of analysis, an appetite for analysis, and we find that it's something that comes very naturally to a lot of commentary talent as well. So it's in one way it's sort of doing the job of explaining the game to viewers. And another thing it really does is it makes the commentary talent look good, because obviously this is second nature to them, and a lot of the times this is what they're thinking in their heads. We just finding the right moment for them to actually just say it on air, and it's a win-win for everyone, really. And as a production philosophy as well, we try and explain the game as much as possible. Cricket is a game with a lot of nuance and a lot of complications, especially to folks who are new to the game. It's nice to be able to explain it to them and break things down. We also try and get our commentary talent to have more simplistic explanations of things that could be explained in very complex ways as well. So it's a bit of both, because you have to keep the cricket fan in mind as well, and the sort of thing that is expected of a coverage by a hardcore cricket fan, but at the same time, you're trying not to alienate younger and more casual viewers as well. Another thing we find is that a lot of following for the game of cricket is actually following for players, especially once the franchise tournaments have really come into their own, there is a huge following for players. So hero building is a very important part of the modern cricket coverage as well. It's not just us. It is most of the TV cricket broadcasters around the world have understood the need to sort of build heroes and champion heroes. So it's another way of getting especially younger and more casual fans hooked onto the sport and to watching sports coverage. So in any tournament, be it a Women's World Cup or be it an Under-19 World Cup or the Men's T20, whichever one, you'll always see a lot of attention given to the champions, to the major players, and what they do on the field of play. In as a production philosophy, that is equally important as well. This exercise of hero building to the modern cricket broadcast, I'd say.
I'm saying, if I may add, villain building too. I'm not saying that is done intentionally, but it does happen.
So there are two ways to look at that, funnily enough, now that you mention it. You're trying to sell a sport at the end of the day as well. What you're trying to do is find a way for people to consume sport. And we see that generally a positive sentiment is what keeps viewers on for longer. So yes, there will be. The idea is obviously not to criticize, but the idea is to celebrate more than criticize, if that makes sense. Because too much of negativity is a surefire way of getting a viewer to sort of reach for the remote and look for something else. Especially for the more casual following and for the more for the younger following, funnily enough, because let's face it, I mean, cricket now has competition from so many things. A kid could spend his or her time doing a number of things, putting the telly on and watching cricket. We have to make that something very desirable for younger folks. So different networks have different ways of looking at it, but a lot of the networks would also tell you that try and celebrate the achievements of the players and make that the centerpiece rather than something someone might have done wrong. Not to not address it and not to not criticize it, but at the same time, the celebration of the champion has to be central to your project.
Absolutely. I think what I was trying to convey is that while broadcasters like you are in the business of celebrating and sort of appreciating the sport, the counter effect happens outside the broadcast in places like social media and in television news and other things, where there is almost a necessity to create the villain because of the counterpoint. But that is not in your hands, so I don't expect you to do that. But the other interesting point that you brought up is, how some television channels, and for me personally, I have noticed this in Australia on their TV broadcast, the intention there, for whatever reason, whether cricket is not the number one sport or for whatever reason, the intention seems to be to hold the viewer to watch till the final ball. And so even if a team needs 50 runs in 2 overs, which is mathematically possible, but realistically not, the commentators will always still mention that stranger things have happened in cricket, or this can happen. And however absurd it sounds, there is an underlying reason why they do that. So is that part of your philosophy as well, to keep the viewer gripped right till the end? So that is an ideal situation. Obviously, you try and make sure that the game goes down to the wire, as they say. That is obviously for a broadcast. That's where you'd like every game to be. However, it's not always possible, and in an ICC TV coverage, I mean, chances are what we'll try and do is entertain the viewer in that. If a game is dead, it's inevitable. Some games will be before their time. Is to try and keep the viewer entertained by getting more stories in. You try looking back at a piece of archive, or you'd look at some of the great performances from that game or that tournament. You champion the tournament a lot.
and the format sometimes. So you look at other ways to sort of keep people interested. Essentially, what you're trying to do is give people a reason to stay, and different producers and different networks and different productions have different ways of dealing with it. But yeah, I mean, many productions go the way of building up that excitement, even if you think the result is mathematically only possible, but not really realistically possible. But the limits of batsmanship these days is also really being stretched, and people do. I mean, miracles do happen more often than they have ever done in the history of cricket and run chasing, especially. So yes, you do try and build up excitement towards the end. You try and hope that every game goes down to the wire. Even if it doesn't, you sometimes clutch at the straws. It's something that most of us do from time to time, and until it becomes very, very plain that it's not going to happen, you always sort of keep that in mind and try and work towards that great ending.
Absolutely. So, let's sort of switch back a bit. You worked for many years, 10 years, I think, as the live producer of a cricket match, where, the job would have been so much more intense on a daily basis. So the question I have here is, of course, to tell us a bit about that. Tell us a bit about the day in the life of a live producer. Maybe if you want to take an example of a match, also fair enough. But also, I have a follow-up question about how very often what you see on television and what you see at the ground when you're live at the stadium are quite vastly different in the story itself, because of what the producer or the director chooses to focus on in a TV broadcast. While if I'm at the ground, I'm not looking at Virat Kohli all the time, but a director may choose to pan to Virat Kohli every time he does something animated. That's just an example. A bit of both, if you can take us into that. Yeah.
The basic two big functions of a producer on the day before a match, and that day is very critical as well, is to make the running order and the roster for the match. The roster there is an art to making a good roster. You have, let's say, 6 or 7 commentators available for a 50 over game. Now, it's up to the exec producer to have rostered a certain number of commentators to every game, firstly, with the right skills, because there are 2 big skills you're looking at for commentary talent. You need the leads or the callers, who are the commentators who call the play, and then there is the expert or the color commentator who then takes over and sort of talks about what just happened, and usually talks over the replays as well. So you need to pair them well so that you always have good leads sitting with good experts. If you have 2 experts, it doesn't really work. If you have 2 leads, it doesn't really work. And personally, I'm a big believer of, getting your best leads and your best experts right at the top, because you have the attention of most of your viewership at the start of the game, and that first stint becomes really critical. You generally leave it in the hands of more experienced and good leads for the first couple of stints at least. And
I think you had mentioned in an interview that you started the 2011 World Cup final. One of the decisions you took was to start with Ravi Shastri early on because of the sort of the energy he gave at the start of that World Cup final, right? You had mentioned in an interview.
Yeah, that is true. There are certain voices and personalities who straight away demand attention. And it's always good to have them at the top. You're also sort of setting the tone, and then the others have to match it. So it's one way of, not letting the broadcast flag a little bit. because you start high energy and then you're likely to sort of maintain that tempo for a while. And there are these nuances which a producer has to really look at and plan accordingly. And rostering is very important, especially who is calling the game home, the decisions you take at that point as well, as to how many voices you need, who are the voices you need. And you also look at chemistry sometimes when you can afford to, which is who goes well with who. And that sometimes plays a part as well when you're trying to get a certain narrative or a certain story out sometimes, because a lot of these commentators have played cricket before, sometimes against each other as well. You can play on those things. You can put a piece of archive and get reactions. You can talk about anecdotes when the game permits. There are various bits and bobs you can do with the right commentary talent. It's up to the producer to sort of visualize all of that early and get all the support material ready. I like to do it on Matchday -1, try and work through what sort of archive I'd put the next day, what sort of stories I wanted to do, sort of send a camera person to the nets just to see if there's anything interesting someone's practicing, try and play that out the next day during the game, just to see if they have been working on something. It's quite instructional to see what they're doing at the nets as well. And we generally tend to have a producer, maybe not the match producer, but a producer at the nets as well, just to see what everyone's up to, what people are practicing. There's a really high percentage that some of that will get translated into the match action the next day. So when you can,
the Mohammad Rizwan thing comes to mind in the recent T20 World Cup, where the nets and the live was so similar.
Yeah. That was the work of one of our fine digital producers who always has an eye out for this sort of thing. And with digital expanding so much, another thing it's done is you have more resources looking at various things. So they're looking to do certain kinds of content as well. So there's a lot of synergy in the way we do things. And it's just easier to sort of hear about more stories and sort of keep an eye out for things on match days. So once you have your sort of like a playlist ready, you have a rough idea of how it's going to play out the next day. Obviously, the game will take its own course, but you need to have stories for if this happens or if the other happens. You still need to have ways of keeping it engaging. It might happen that the game goes in a completely different direction to what you had imagined it would. But then the onus is on you to sort of think on your feet and find ways to keep it engaging. You can get a lot of packages ready during the game itself of events that happen in the game, and you can shape a lot of editorial with that also. In our coverage, we also do a lot of signposting at various points of the match. You almost expect to see certain things, so we do insert those. In terms of packages, in terms of celebratory sort of montages, just to keep the pace of the broadcast at a reasonable level, and also to sort of address various audience tastes. I mean, you can do 10 analysis pieces and there'll still be people who are left not entertained. So sometimes a good slow-mo montage goes a long way in sort of changing the sort of tone of the broadcast for a bit and celebrating a great performance or a great piece of action. Just you need to make sure that the appropriate voice is saying the appropriate thing during a lot of these packages. So that's the other challenge. You try and work with your commentary talent. You try and brief them as much as you can about what might come, and quite a lot of them in our world at least are very engaged with this. So once you have their buy-on, things become so much simpler. We've tried to sort of enable a workflow as well that helps with this sort of editorial. We also have specialist analysis producers in our coverage. Their job is basically to look for analysis stories and speak to the commentators and sort of almost get them ready, prep those. And during the match, obviously they'll just ask the commentator what they thought about that first half hour and if there are any stories that they've spotted. Quite often what happens is that the commentators spot their own great analysis pieces, which they might not always know how best to sort of bring it alive. But if they sometimes mention the story to the producer or the analysis producer, it's very easy to sort of get the right tools. Maybe it's Hawkeye, maybe it's EVS for replays, and maybe it's graphics or a specialist sort of deep dive data service that we have access to as well. Maybe it's them to just find the story and just line it up with the producer and get it played out. So there are those types of stories as well that develop during the games. It's important for the producer and the director to be on the same wavelength always, because you need to get to know your director really well. The two of you have to work in tandem to sort of take things forward. So the director's role is a super critical one. It's very hands-on, and it's probably the most important role for the day for anyone on the broadcast. But the sheer number of things that the director has to chase and look after is just immense. So you try and make sure that the director's in a good space as well, and that the two of you are communicating well, and that the director knows what you're trying to achieve that day, and the various stories that you're prepping, etc. Some of them like to do the job more on the fly, but I really recommend, at least for our events, that things are rehearsed, things are spoken about in advance, and everyone should really know what the other's up to on the day. Usually a member from each of the teams give you an interview before the start of the day, so that if you need to insert that either in the show or during the game, that's available to you. Quite often you'll find some interesting bits coming in from those interviews, which are quite useful. You try and pre-record things like the pitch report if you can. The ground staff have to work on the pitch, so you look at an appropriate time that you worked out with them where you have access to the pitch, and you get that done. Pitch reports, of course, are a very inexact science. So it's also, from our perspective at least, it's nice to go through a bit of archive, see how it has behaved in the past, just to sort of look for answers as to how it might behave. Although there are no certainties with most pitches, and you try and put your best people for that job on the day there. It's either people who have experience playing there, or people who have a lot of experience played in a number of games. You try and give your best commentary talent that job, because it's very easy to get that wrong. So you're trying to sort of play the odds there.
There are some experts in that regard, right? I mean, I think Jeremy Coney was a master when it came to reading pitches. Ravi Shastri himself, extremely good. Tony Gregg, of course, with the famous key that he used to insert.
Yeah. Absolutely, and Jeff Boycott as well used to try the key technique. So there are a number of things to look at on the morning, and hopefully you've rostered accordingly. You need a very good sort of presenter or someone who can conduct ceremonies well to do the toss, because that takes a bit of orchestrating, and there are a number of things to remember. It seems relatively simple, but I can assure you it's not, because you're trying to hit counts as well. You're listening in your ear to your director all the time. You are listening to when the world is joining in and the world is with you. You get your cue, then you start. You introduce the two captains, the match referee, and go through the protocol of tossing the coin and calling and all of that. Then you have to keep an eye on whether it was heads or tails, and accurately go to the right captain with the mic. And there are a certain number of questions that you have to ask. It's easy to sometimes forget the order, but okay, what will you do? Why are you doing that? What are the changes in your side? It seems simple enough, but when it's live and when there are so many voices speaking to you, and there's commotion really all around you because teams are practicing, things are happening all around you. There's a lot of noise on the ground. People are filling up the stands. So it's important that they hold their composure and they ask the right things and they get everything away. And quite often I really sort of am in awe of the captains as well, because they're thinking of so many things themselves. They're working out things in their heads and they get the right answers out, and they get the changes in the teams. That is the most tricky one for everyone, really.
Many miss them.
So the interviewers are trying to work that out. The captains are trying to work that out. The graphics operators, meanwhile, are trying to work that out as well, because immediately after that, they're expected to get the 11 out. And so there are a number of people who are listening to that. And it's amazing how often it actually works really well when the odds are always that it shouldn't.
I can tell you that as somebody who's done ball-by-ball commentary on Cricinfo, I was also listening very carefully to that. And when there was a mistake in that, I would get so frustrated and saying, oh no, what is this?
True. I can only imagine. I mean, these are just the people that I see. And once that's done with, it's always a bit of a relief. Then you get on to the rest of the show. You have to be very careful to hit your brakes on time as well, because broadcasters around the world who are obviously taking the show, they have their sponsorship commitments as well. So all that, you need to hit times very accurately. So the presenters of these shows also have to be really, really very, very good, and very good with time management. We try and get anyone on the show listening to the director, listening to the DA, the director's assistant, to sort of listen to how long they have left on a particular segment before the next feature needs to be played, or before the next item needs to be played, or before you need to go to a pitch report or whatever, just so that they know how much time approximately they have left. So they have to sort of answer accordingly, not too long, not too short, and yet give everyone enough time. So along with the editorial, which is obviously the most important, the most central, time management becomes very critical as well, because you have to hit your cues, you have to hit your times. Because the player walkouts happen at a certain time, no one's going to wait for you. The anthem started at a certain time, no one's going to wait for you. So you have to sort of nail those. And then once the match starts, obviously you're on match mode, and all the prep that I spoke about earlier comes into play. And things go, I mean, the gears just shift completely. And you're focusing on the match, on the stories of the match.
And you're always in the ear of the commentators, right?
Yes, that's right. So the commentators they listen to a fascinating array of voices in their ears as they're doing the commentary as well. Some of them turn them up louder because they really like it. Most commentators like to hear the ambient sounds as well, and the stump mics as well, because there's sometimes, especially on big match days, there is a roar, and it's good if they speak above that almost to hit their natural pitch, and they sort of adjust accordingly. They're listening to the director because you need to know what's coming up next. For a commentator, you need to be watching the monitor as well, because everything plays out there rather than just looking at the ground. They listen to the producer, obviously, because the producer also cues what's coming next. And occasionally, I mean, you can produce it many gears. Sometimes it's a very interesting stretch of play, and you're best that they're left to their own devices. Quite often what you try and do is warn them about what's coming next, because there are certain protocols that you have to do. If the ball just narrowly misses the bat, you have to get to the replay very quickly. So they might be going on another tangent, but it's up to you to sort of bring them back and warn them and tell them this is happening and speak about it. Similarly, a at the start of every over, you'd be prepping for something new. So you'd be telling your lead commentator at least that this is coming up. Just be ready for it. Chances are you'd have discussed it before. So it's just a matter of remembering the right thing. Personally, when I was producing, at least I used to keep a preview monitor just next to their main match monitor, so that, and which I had a router for and control of. So occasionally I could play something out there for them. They could sneak a glance at it before it actually came onto the program feed, which is what everyone sees, and they're expected to provide the soundtrack to. So preview monitor, I mean, some producers like to keep it, others are okay without it. I always like to sort of have that as a crutch as well. And then, I mean, you're going with the editorial of the match. Like I said, there are certain things that you'd like to, again, talk about right at the start of the match, about the playing 11s again. There's a very good chance that a lot of the viewers will only start watching from the first ball. So just if there are interesting changes, interesting omissions, or interesting people who've come in, that's a nice bit of conversation for the start. Similarly, just a word on the conditions. You normally play a pitch hoover out, just give them shots of the pitch, and if they can, it's up to those two commentators to sort of either talk about, I mean, just reinforce what was earlier on the pitch report, or get their own thoughts in. And there are a number of set pieces like that you sort of get them into the groove of the game with. And then when they're calling the action, you try and sort of make sure that both voices, or all three voices, as the case may be, are heard equally. Sometimes it's easy for some commentators to dominate others. You just need to make sure that that's not happening always, or if it's happening, that there's a legitimate editorial reason for why that's happening. Occasionally, there are good reactions that you'll see from the dugout or from the dressing rooms. It's quite hard to sort of point a camera there and try and make out expressions. But with the T20 format and with players sitting in the dugout, it's quite instructive. Sometimes they're working on a play, and then you go back to the coach for reactions. You see how they're reacting to certain plays, and there are some commentators who are brilliant with that. With predicting what the play is going to be. And we try and tell them, sort of keep it interesting for the viewer, and from time to time stick their necks out and just say it. What's the worst that can happen? Something they might either execute it differently or wrongly. But it's always nice to be ahead of the game, build that sense of anticipation. It's like a teaser for the next ball, really, or for the rest of the over, and you can't go wrong with that. Commentators there, especially a lot of the female commentators at the Women's World Cup, for instance, who were very, very savvy with what was going on the field of play. I mean, we're in a space at this point where not enough of them get enough opportunity always to show it off, but there is so much talent out there, and the way the modern game is played, whether a lot of the purists amongst us like it or not, analysis and matchups is such a huge part of it. And it's interesting to see, especially players who've just retired and come into the field of commentary, or players who were recently active until very recently, how they read the game is quite different from the generation before that. Informed by T20 cricket, no doubt, and the sort of, cricket itself has changed in a lot of respects, in the amount of data that is logged, in the amount of information that is available to players. So a lot of the younger commentators tend to be informed by that, and they are very aware of the matchups, and they keep an eye out for this sort of thing. So quite often, they're very happy to sort of have a chat with the statistician, or even sometimes disagree and bring fresh ideas onto the table. The general thinking will be, okay, this matchup suggests this, so therefore this should follow with that result. Except then some of these newly recently retired players who've become commentators will come and give you a fresh perspective on that, saying that, no, but this is just a bluff. This is what they think the teams will do. So therefore, this is why they're following this particular course of action. So there's a lot of interesting recent experience that some of these fresher talent bring to the table as well.
I wanted to touch upon that one point that you brought up about the commentary and the cues that you're giving. There must be some point. I did an interview with Ian Bishop a year or so ago, and he said that he is one of those commentators who doesn't really like to talk too much. And often he needs a prod to someone saying, come on, it's time for you to say something. So how often do you have to do that? And at the same time, how often do you have to balance that out with somebody who's probably talking too much and to say, hey, can you just sort of take it easy for a bit?
Yeah, so these are also the function of the roles that you give them sometimes, because the lead will have to be heard quite a lot. Now, there are certain commentators, like you brought Pish into the conversation, like Pish or like, say, Nasir Hussain, who are equally comfortable as leads and equally comfortable as experts. So their job description just can change, and they're very good at it. They're great at both. So sometimes when a natural lead is someone you are assigning the role of an expert or a color commentator to during a stint, sometimes they can make the mistake of speaking too little. But like you rightly said, you have to sometimes prod them into action. It's let me say, it's not a very common problem, but it does happen from time to time. So especially when stints are tighter and the time they're on a stint is less, they're even more engaged. So when you give them long stints of, there are many ways of working out stints. Sometimes in 50-over games, a popular one was give them 7-over stints. Sometimes it could fly if spinners were bowling, and sometimes if faster bowlers were bowling, it could take half an eternity. So occasionally there is that little ebb and flow, and there will be times when things are quieter. But then the job of a producer becomes to sort of enliven those passages and make them exciting, provide enough material for the commentators to be very engaged with, and get all of them to sort of react to things as often as possible. So it does happen, but not something that we face a lot, I must say.
What about the reverse issue? Does that happen?
Yeah, I was just coming to that. The other problem happens more often than one thinks, but that's, again, if you roster well and if you have the right names and the right mix of names working together, it should happen less and less. You try your best to sort of make it balanced in terms of one more likely or less likely to dominate the other. I mean, you don't want that situation, so you're trying your best to sort of move away from I won't say rostering mistakes. Sometimes you can only play with the cards you're dealt with, who's available, but you try and put a balanced sort of roster out there, and good rostering actually can help take a lot of these smaller issues away, like the ones that talk too much and the ones that talk too little. But there are times you have to tell. Yeah, and you have to tell, on occasion, you have to tell one of the commentators to sort of, to put the mic down, really. And it's a thing with the lip mic, sometimes it causes an amount of confusion as well for people who are newly into the commentary space, which is a lip mic is something that you have to lift it, you make your point, and then you're expected to put it down, back down. That works as a cue for the other guy to start talking as well. There are these fashionable headsets as well that a lot of broadcasters use. I mean, personally, I still prefer the lip mic only because with the headset, it gives you another unique problem of people talking over each other a lot. And especially when something interesting has happened, there's a very good chance two people are talking together. And the thing is, for our events, because the archive of our event is extremely important, because a lot of very special things happen in these World Cups. So you have to deal with, this is archive that's got to last forever. You have to keep an eye on that as well. And it has a certain value.
For highlights and certain other packages. Yeah.
And not just highlights. You have to remember that because these are World Cups, and a tight finish in a World Cup or an exceptional innings in a World Cup could be remembered for all time to come. So you have to deal with it. It puts on the producer a certain kind of responsibility to sort of make sure that you have the right talent calling it, because it's got to last forever, really. Think of it like that. So it's important that the big milestones are dealt with nicely, and that you've got to sort of prep the lead commentator sometimes that, okay, this might come. So during your stint, think of a nice line. All these commentary talent we use are obviously professionals, and they're very, very capable. So all you have to do is just prod them and remind them that this might be coming. So please be ready.
Yeah, in fact, Bish, in that same interview, brought up the exact same point that you said. I was talking to him about that famous 2016 moment when he called Carlos Brathwaite 4 sixes in Calcutta. And he said that, he was telling me how that Remember the Name came up because he had mentioned it the previous day. But then he said, but then he clearly mentioned you, and he said, Ajesh always says, keep a line in mind. And I actually didn't have it in mind. It just came naturally because I'd used it. But he said, had I listened to Ajesh, I might have actually had that in mind before saying it, which would have been helpful too. So,
yeah, it was a funny one because it looked like England was going to win.
Yeah.
So David Lloyd was the assigned lead, but he was very thinking on his toes as well at that point. Like, he was very quick to sort of tell Bish to call that last one if it goes for a 6. Yeah, but I do generally like to warn talent, especially who are rostered on that last stint. You always put capable people there, and people who can really talk up big moments. That much is taken care of by the rostering, but then you really do your bit even then, and then try to remind them that something special is about to happen. Just make it special for us, for everyone who's listening, watching. No pressure. So it's a way for them as well to sort of leave a legacy, because for a lot of them, these moments will be remembered. And because these generally are big world events, what they did as a commentator, these sort of moments really add to that legacy as well. So it's important for everyone, really. And generally, because of these world events, I do remind them often of the responsibility they have to sort of say something that works for posterity, really. And all of them are really very up for it all of the time, and they're always looking for someone's 100 or someone's spectacular wicket or 5-wicket hold, sort of give that the soundtrack it deserves.
And which brings me to the point about one of the things I think that the producers in the ICC particularly do really well, and I'm saying this after observing various broadcasts, is that they seem to get a certain tonality of the sort of the way in which the game is played. A game, every cricket match has a certain tone and a certain rhythm to it. And it is so important for the commentary and the production to get that in the ambience. The same commentators in a sort of a different tournament or in a different event, they seem to, don't have that level of rhythm, at least totally in my experience. So is that all down to production? Is that vital in terms of how the producer is guiding the whole thing?
Yes, I mean, that is a big part of it. Not saying that's the only thing, but kind of you to say what you just said, but for our events, and I'm sure a lot of other big networks definitely do it as well, which is have sessions with the commentary talent about what this tournament is about, what this occasion is about. It's important to give context, really, so that they know as well, and they're working as part of the production rather than the production working for them, really. Just to make everyone aware of where your production is going as a team. That really helps when the commentators then buy into it, and then they play their part within the overall sort of structure of where the broadcast is going. So then that's when you have that feeling that things are fitting together, like all the pieces of the jigsaw just come together, and a lot of that is down to the producer on the day to sort of catch those moments, catch the pulse of where the game is going, and deal with it appropriately. Sometimes you don't need to do too much. Sometimes you can overkill. It's just moving in and similarly moving out as well at some points to sort of heighten the experience. Sometimes, especially during close finishes and everything, the worst thing you can do is actually overproduce, because that's not a time to look at various other things. That is a time to just be there, look at the tension on the faces. The directors usually come on into their own, and then they're cutting for reactions, they're cutting for crowd reactions at the end of every delivery almost, and they are building up that sense of anticipation and tension and excitement. You're going to the dugout, you're looking at faces, you're looking at the nervous skipper, the coach, and trying to get reactions off the batters and the bowlers. So you're building up a story there. You're telling a story with just the pictures and the ambience and everything that's going on there. Then the worst thing you can do is, like play packages and go away from that moment. It's critical for a producer to know when to stay in the moment and when to sort of step away. When stepping away can mean adding to the product, and sometimes when not doing anything at all and just letting it breathe is the thing to do. It's just very important to sort of find those right moments and the rhythm, like you mentioned. That is the skill of a producer as well. You won't nail it all the time, but for producers, as long as they nail it most of the time, it's still a good result.
No, I think one of the advantages you have is you immediately have that context which you just mentioned. This is, you're producing great tournaments and which are going to stand the test of time. I mean, even if you take something like the ICC World Test Championship, it is like one event that is going to be remembered for a long time, irrespective of how many ever years the Test Championship happens, because it's the first time India-New Zealand final it happened. So I think that itself gives your tournaments a gravitas, which then can inform the rhythm of the thing. Unlike, say, a bilateral tournament, which of course has its importance, but it doesn't necessarily have that weight that a World Cup game may have.
Yeah, absolutely. And to that, I'll just say that we're incredibly fortunate to be doing these big events, because there's always context that automatically sort of arrives with the stature of the event and what the teams are trying to do. For bilaterals, it's harder. So, I mean, I have a lot of respect to the productions that do a lot of bilateral cricket, actually, and still make it a great experience to watch, because you're struggling for this sort of context quite often. And you have to sort of invent a lot of it and be very, good with your craft to sort of make it a very good viewing experience. And there are productions that do it really well also. I always look forward to those, especially Test cricket, still mostly bilateral. So the sort of context that productions weave in. I mean, now there's the World Test Championship, but there always wasn't that. But just to sort of find that context, find those stories, work with the ebb and flow of the format, and put a product out there that is brilliant to watch as well. That is a very special skill.
Absolutely. Which brings me to, just that one more point I want to bring on commentary is that, all that you mentioned during the game, the producer giving cues, telling people that, to adjust their flow or the amount they're talking, etc. How much of feedback happens after the day's play or after the game? Because Ian Chappell, one of the things that he said in an interview is that, when I used to work in the heyday of Channel 9, I used to always get feedback. But these days, many people don't even give me feedback, which I'm terribly disappointed with, because I am constantly looking to improve. But perhaps because of his stature or perhaps because of something, people just stopped giving him feedback at some point. So I want to understand how much of a back and forth happens between the commentators and the producers after the event or the game.
So I can't say for every production, but it is a very healthy thing to have that feedback channel. And I can imagine, I've personally been in situations where, as a young producer starting out, especially, where there are commentators that sometimes don't want to listen, as in they're like, look, I've played the game for 20 years. What do you know? But they came with that attitude, not that anyone actually verbalized it. But sometimes there are those that you occasionally sort of stay away from. Chappelli is not one of those, but just as a general statement, sometimes there are personalities like that. But I think also the skill of a producer and a director, I would say, is to also find that common ground with the commentary talent and be able to approach them and speak to them. Because the very important part, like you rightly said, is a very important part of the development of that commentator, not just generally, but you want them to do a certain job on your broadcast at least. So there is a certain amount of feedback that is necessary to bring the commentator onto the same page as the production. And that can only work through, feedback after the game. Sometimes you can dress it up well, saying this is what you did brilliantly and this is what we'd like you to do more of. But that feedback channel is very important, I'd say. And does enough of that happen? I certainly hope so. But probably not everyone needs to be spoken to after every game. But generally, I can tell you from our events that, as a general statement, when there is something someone's done really well or not, we sort of have our ways to let them know. It might not always be a stern word or anything. I mean, quite a lot of the time, once you have that relationship with a commentator, they know that you're only saying this to make them better. So they are quite receptive as well. So I just say that, yes, there may be occasions, there may be instances where we could do that better. But by and large, as a general statement, it's something that is done.
Yeah, I mean, I bring that up also because, in this day and age of social media, commentary gets such a rap. It's such an easy target. And I myself have gone after commentators for various aspects. And many people do. But at the same time, there's also the balancing act of how challenging their job actually is. And live broadcasts bring its own challenges. And how much of the feedback do you take seriously and how much of it do you actually, ignore is a challenge for you, I'm sure. Yeah.
Yeah, social media, sometimes there are people that you listen to and there are a lot of people that you don't listen to. So it's just that job of filtering. It's funnily enough, it's a very instant feedback mechanism, but you just got to be careful who you're listening to, because people can easily go off on a tangent and say things as well. So we generally tell the commentators not to take it too seriously unless we tell them that this is a problem, because there are a lot of voices out there. And, it's not always very pleasant. It's not a very pleasant space. So you don't want their confidence rattled either. So generally tell them not to take it seriously. Although I don't know in realistic terms how that plays out, because I can't imagine if whatever I was doing, if my work was under scrutiny like this all of the time, how I'd be able to perform. They're also human beings at the end of the day. So I actually sometimes when I see something where I just hope they don't see it, because there's usually quite a good reason for why somebody said something. more often than not. And there's pretty good reason from either a workflow perspective or whatever, or what they were expected to say, or the role they had on that particular day, which might have played a big part in either what they said or didn't. And you don't expect the public outside to know that and react appropriately or proportionately. So from that perspective, you try and tell your commentary talent not to look at social media a lot, because not a lot of that criticism is informed. Sometimes it is, but it's up to you to sort of filter that and give them that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just the public, right, Ajesh? It's also players themselves who are now starting to go after some commentators, and then that amplifies things to such an extent that the commentator then becomes the villain, and it becomes
It's the reality of the world we live in, and social media has become what it is today. So, for most people who are in the spotlight, this is part of the territory now. And I honestly don't know what the answer to that is, because it must be hard to be, to have every bit of your work scrutinized and you can't win all the time, because somebody will take offense. I mean, as a commentator, your job might be to sort of point something out, but somebody or the other will take offense and react to that, and then things just spiral. I think just as a network or as executive producers, part of your job is to sort of tell them that, okay, what you said, it was okay, or it was expected of you. You were just doing your job, and sort of give them that clarity at least. The worst position you can put them in is if they're not sure how to go about their work.
Yeah, I mean, here's the dilemma, right? I mean, nobody wants to listen to boring commentary, but at the same time, anything that is even remotely, provocative or remotely bold, as you mentioned, you ask people to go out on a limb, but very often they're wrong, and that then gets amplified into, oh, look how foolish he comes across. So, but at the same time, he had the courage to actually say something rather than just sit on the fence, which would be boring. So, it's a fine line. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, and it's amplified because of social media now, and the access people have to these commentators as well. This very much might have been the case earlier, but there was no common space for people to vent their frustrations on one platform. So now that's been enabled, I think as we move ahead, I'm sure this is not an exclusive problem for cricket commentators. There are politicians and all other famous people in various walks of life who are facing the exact same dilemma. So it's something for the famous to work out.
Absolutely. Which brings me to another very fundamental question, which may seem very amateurish for you, but it is. I'm curious to know. Back when I started watching cricket, it was very common to see a batsman hitting a ball and the camera moving in a direction where the ball is not going, where the ball is not at all traveling, and then it would immediately shift again and it would go. We don't see any of that these days. So is the reason for that just more number of cameras? So if one camera misses it, the other one catches it? Or is it something more fundamental that I'm missing?
I think tech is a lot better now to start with. So, and the number of specialists you have, that pool has also increased a lot. So back in the day, you might have a ball follow cameraman whose job is to do exactly what you said, just follow the ball. So there is a formula to camera cutting when the live delivery is happening. So until the point that the ball is released, you have a particular camera. Once that's hit to some part of the ground, is another camera that takes over and does the ball follow before you go on to the reactions and whatnot. So the ball follow cameramen today are specialists who work on the same camera doing the same thing most of the time. So they're really good at their job. You'd have the odd mistake now and again. That usually happens with leading edges and things like that because the batter is going a certain direction. So the ball follow cameraman is taking his or her cues and going that way. and then it's a leading edge, just like everyone else. Occasionally they get fooled as well, and then you have to move back. But by and large, their viewfinders are great. The equipment they're working with is great. The grounds are properly lit. So you can still lose the ball occasionally, but doesn't happen that often. Back in the day, also you had fewer cameras and fewer the things you had to work with were fewer as well. So in case somebody missed something, there was no camera to cut to from the other end, which could, suppose there's a high catch, you quite often see a camera cut from the other end, just showing the fielder taking the catch. That sort of thing was just not possible in another time. The same person would have to then find the fielder, and the ball follow cameraman would have to sort of show a considerable bit of the action. Yeah, I just put that down to specialists, more number of specialists, more number of cameras, better tech. So all of that plays a part in that. The modern broadcast is actually quite sophisticated.
Two of the things that I really, really wished would be in the coverage was, one was, of course, the fielding chart showing where the fielders are. And I'm glad that you added that for the 2019 World Cup. I think maybe, was it even before that, or was it for the 2019?
Yeah, so earlier, before 2019, there were productions that had a similar graphic, but they were not live. So there was a manual operator who, after each ball, had to sort of adjust. And on many occasions, when you wanted to go to it, it wouldn't be ready because the operator would still be following the fielder's movement. So the thing you needed to do was really make it live and put tech in that sort of solve for that. So yeah, the 2019 World Cup was one of the first instances where you actually saw it live, and then you could just go to it anytime. So anytime the commentators would mention, you could just cut to it, and now that's a staple. Most broadcasters use it, and I think it's been a fantastic addition as well, because unlike batting and bowling, fielding is the least analyzed discipline in cricket.
Yeah, and the least data available for fielding.
That's because it's so subjective, because how one logger might log it as whether there was a possibility of a second run that was saved or not. It's very difficult to sort of standardize that, and even in commentary, when sometimes what does qualify as a drop catch? I mean, if the ball is on the full and if you get your hand to it, that is a drop catch, or if you get any part of the body to it. But at the same time, sometimes for better fielders, they might actually get to the ball, and therefore it might be a drop catch. Otherwise, it would have just passed by. So then it's up to the person logging it whether to call it. If it was a difficult chance, do you still log it as a missed opportunity or not? So there is that problem of subjectivity, which cricket still hasn't fully solved. And therefore that has an impact on the runs something is cost, missed opportunity is cost, or run saved in the field. So while we have those metrics available to us, there is a degree of subjectivity still.
Absolutely. But I think that the whole, that ICC sort of the fielding graphic, where it can really help, of course, if enough people have access to that records. I don't know if how many people have access to that other than the ICC, but if they do, then I can see in the future it moving towards the NBA kind of spatial modeling, where you can actually spatially model how different people set different fields to different players and where the ball goes, etc. I mean, there are spatial possibilities there.
Yes, absolutely. And the challenge is, while at this point only some tournaments employ it, some broadcasts employ it, others don't. So any data that you have is good for that event, really, and doesn't go beyond, which is frustrating. But yeah, I mean, these are challenges that I'm sure we'll find a way to solve sooner than later.
It can only get better.
Yeah. Well,
well, the other question I have is, oh, sorry, you were saying?
Yeah, no, we are at the infancy of that project. So let's see how this space develops.
Yeah, I mean, I'm thrilled. I'm thrilled that we are at the beginning. Yes, it should, and it will, and it should, and I think people in the ICC and people who have this data can really in the future when the number of when the data samples increase, I think the possibilities are quite endless. The other thing I wanted to ask is in terms of camera angles alone. Again, when I started watching cricket, I used to really enjoy the camera angle where which was facing the bowler, and I felt my appreciation of bowling is largely due to that. Of course, now over many years that has changed, and we never see that angle anymore. But has there been any kind of thought that maybe bring that back for some phases of the game or some maybe small bits?
I think that reverse angle, as we call it, it's still available, obviously, because there are camera operators specifically doing that angle every ball.
Sure.
So that is still available. But I think there is a certain audience expectation now. I mean, I know that very discerning sort of viewers might have like this very specific asks, but I think by and large, the expectation is to see the game from front on. Back in the day, there wasn't enough cameras, so you could only cover it from one side. And you had one gantry and cameras on that gantry. So every alternate over, you'd see the reverse angle, basically. So I think the minute cricket coverage, the specs increased to covering it from both sides, that was one of the first things that went out of the game. What's interesting is that's still available as a replay angle, obviously. So whenever there's a new bowler, especially a faster bowler who comes to bowl, in the very first over, you'll see quite a lot of output from that angle as a reverse angle, and you'll see the run up, or from at least one of the angles, you'll see the run up of the bowler. You'll see the ball release, that sort of thing. So while it is still available and it gets on the broadcast in fits and starts, obviously not as a live angle anymore, because largely the audience expectation is to see cricket from front on now, and there is the tech to do it and the number of cameras and the spec to enable it.
Understandable. I will resign myself to being the minority here.
However, I must say that sorry, just to interrupt. There is the way it's going to go in the future is once all of the angles are available on digital platforms separately, perhaps, then each viewer will probably get to decide where to watch cricket from, and that could be the future. I mean, it largely depends on how the markets grow and how things play out in the media rights on the media rights side of things. But I don't think we're far from a situation where you could potentially have on certain platforms the ability to choose your angle. Then you'll be able to watch it from wherever.
And choose your commentary team as well, hopefully, at some point.
That might be a stretch, because that'll need to be done physically.
No, yes. I'm saying there should be 2 or 3 different options that are actually being done for every game. I mean, the classic commentary, the geeky commentary, various, and no commentary, maybe even.
Yeah. So, I mean, that's the easiest option. You can just reach the remote and have that. But yeah, Star.
No, not remote. I want the ambient sound. I want the ambient sound.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. Star in India obviously have been pioneers in getting their select feed out, which is address the more discerning cricket fan. So there will be broadcasters around the world who will offer, as time goes by, more of these services, and around the world there have been experiments in other sports, certainly for kids commentary, for instance, have a kids feed. That's happened in cricket as well, and a non-serious sort of a lighter commentary, breezier commentary style. So things are being tried. I think in the Indian subcontinent itself, we've had quite a lot of experiments like this. And in times to come, I'm sure we'll see a lot more of this. And what you just mentioned now might well be reality in the not too distant future.
Okay. Which takes me to another question. And again, I don't know whether this is in your ambit or not, but it definitely will be in your ambit during live games when, a director, producer, sometimes during a game may come across footage that they may not necessarily, they may be in a moral dilemma whether to show or not, because it could be an extremely controversial moment. They could sense that this could cause a lot of controversy in the world of cricket, and then you have to decide what to show, what not to show, who to focus on. And of course, there has been moments like not ICC events, but Sandpaper Gate was, of course, the most recent such moment. And then there have also been a lot of chat about how home broadcasters tend to have a certain say in these matters, and none of it, of course, is proven and none of it is known. But there are murmurs in that regard. But purely as a live producer, how do you deal with this? Is there someone you go to, or is it just your gut instinct that you use? How does that work?
So there's no real code for this sort of thing, to be fair. I mean, there are murmurs, obviously. I don't know if that's true or not, to be fair. There are a number of things that could come into the ambit of this. I mean, for instance, sometimes you see vision that you can't broadcast for obvious reasons on air. So obviously that won't make the cut. Sometimes you have messaging that you don't want to put on air. It could be
like somebody going out with a protest message or something.
Yeah, which, I mean, it's not our place to decide on politics, on the right and wrongs of things. These are questions far beyond us. And you probably not want the broadcast to be hijacked by messaging like that. So there are things that you try and stay away from. Sometimes it's not even possible because you're just cutting to reactions and something just comes up, it comes up. But we try and be careful. You brief your camera ops, the directors alert, do certain kinds of things. Like, especially a common one is messaging. Like if it's in a language that you don't speak, you just don't know what's on those banners, right? So you have to be very careful with that as well. So you need to just make sure that someone on the crew has seen it and understood it and is not offensive. It could just basically be someone swearing, for instance. So you try and avoid things that you can avoid. But more to your point, to what teams do deliberately, sandpaper gate type issues. I mean, there's no hard and fast code, really. As a producer, I'd like to think that you go on the evidence of what you see and you put it out there. And the judgment is not for you to make. It's for someone who's more experienced than you. Maybe a commentator is in a better position to sort of see what's happening there. I mean, and I'd like to believe that you put it out there and then the public or the viewers or the commentators can try and help decipher some of that, and then the viewers can decide for themselves. It's not an ideal world, obviously, and I don't know if that happens a lot. But at the same time, if you have shots and if you see something, if you spot something, I'd like to think that it's there for public consumption. You're not at the same time trying to be naughty and trying to run a certain narrative. That's not nice either. Because you're trying to do justice to the game also at the same point. If there's been a mistake, sometimes what we talk about, and this is an evolving space where several of us have made mistakes in the past, but you try and think how you deal with it better next time, is when you see a bad umpiring decision, it's bad. You put it out there, you addressed it, you've moved on. Now, how many times do you bring it back? Because there are some commentators often who feel that you should see it, you should revisit it at every possible opportunity. And then as a storyteller, you're thinking, well, shouldn't you move on with the game? So I'd always say, address it, you've done your bit, and then move on. And then these things are subjective again. Some other producer might turn around and say, but that changed the whole course of the match, so why not take a look at it? And that's fair as well. But personally, I'd like to believe that if I wasn't put in a position like that, and if I saw footage like that, I'd play it, address it, then move on. But there are many ways of looking at it, and there's no one correct answer for a lot of questions in life. This is one of those.
I mean, I guess the other issue with the ICC, I mean, you can clarify this, but the other issue is that also the umpires are ICC umpires, right? So how much are the ICC broadcasts going to criticize ICC umpires? Isn't that
it's plain to see you've made a poor decision. It's plain to see that it is a poor decision. I mean, you can't hide behind it beyond a point, right? And
absolutely, but at the same time, you wouldn't want to make it appear as if that was the be all and end all in that game, right? I mean, it was the game went on much longer, and there were other moments and etc. Yeah,
100%. I mean, this often pops up at our events. To be fair, you try and address it and then move on. And the one thing I try and remind commentators is only that umpires are human as well, and occasionally when they make a good decision, please applaud them, because you're going to criticize the hell out of them when they make a mistake. So when they give a particularly good decision, never fail in appreciating that. And I'd say that for anyone really, not because it's an umpire, but umpires, it's a hard job. And what they do, I mean, they only come into focus when the wrong decisions are made, never for the right ones. And I just still think that commentators should also applaud when a good decision is made. And some of them remember to do it even when they go on to other broadcasts. Some others don't, which is all fine. I mean, at the end of the day, we're all here to sort of do good cricket broadcasts and serve entertainment to the public. So,
which brings me to the final part of this, Ajesh. You've been working in broadcast for so long. Please give us like one game or two games or something that, from a producer's point of view or from an executive producer's point of view, somebody who is in the background, which will always stay with you. It could be a moment, it could be the end of a game, it could be the start of a game, something that you feel that, tested you, and yet you sort of remember it memorably for coming through that and doing a great job and you're proud of. Don't tell me every game is the same. Don't give me the cliched, all games are equal and all that.
You put me on the spot now, and I'm just trying to take recency bias out of the picture.
Okay.
Those are the ones who remember the best. There are a few moments which stand out, both as a producer and an executive producer. As a producer, there's a few. 2011 World Cup was obviously a highlight. There was the semi-final in Mohali, actually, which I really, really enjoyed. The final was great as well, of course, but the semi-final especially. The atmosphere was something else, and India versus Pakistan is always special. And just doing justice to sort of the production and doing a big match like that, and getting that whole sense of atmosphere and tension, and getting the narrative right more than wrong, and getting that match out was an early highlight. I really enjoyed that. The final was brilliant for the atmosphere, and that was a very good case of not overproducing when you don't need to, when the event and the situation and everything that's being played out in front of you is doing most of the storytelling. But that was more for the occasion, really. Then I'd definitely say a really interesting passage of play I've enjoyed tremendously was this game in Adelaide, Pakistan, Australia, where Wahab Riaz was bowling all those short one to Shane Watson. It was a really special passage of play, and I had an EBS Red operator who was brilliant on that day and was so on the pulse of everything that was going on. It was just creating a beautiful storytelling passage of play there, just replay packages and obviously commentary adding to it. And that was a really special passage of play that I remember to this day. As executive producer, it's just you're trying to do your best to create a situation where people can excel and do well. So, and early highlight was actually the Women's World Cup in 2017 was quite special. At very short notice, there were several folks at the ICC who really played a blinder. And although our media rights contracts didn't really force us to produce telecast all games, there was a very late sort of decision to get 10 games broadcast at a certain spec and the other games broadcast well, but at a different spec. And within a couple of months, I was able to sort of pull that together. And it happened at the back of another event, a Champions Trophy as well. So it was a really busy time, but managed to just get reasonably good coverage for that event. With doing full justice to that event. And there was this one particular match in Bristol that I really enjoyed where Chamari Attapattu was playing one of the greatest innings I've seen against Australia, who were, I think, the defending champions at the time and sort of looked unbeatable even then. But here was truly one of the great innings in women's cricket that just by the fact that we managed to pull together a production setup at short notice, we managed to save it, and that footage exists. Just the joy of that itself is quite something for me. And
lovely ground too, right? Bristol. I mean, lovely. No, I'm saying lovely ground too, Bristol. I mean, it must be interesting to produce games from grounds of various sizes as well. And Bristol is a very distinctively small ground.
It is, yeah. It was taking nothing away from that innings though, which was very special against a great Australian side. That was a highlight. Similarly, getting most things right for the Cricket World Cup in 2019 overall, and getting the production done for that was quite something I really enjoyed, and that. Super Over in the end was one of those experiences that are, I guess, once in a lifetime. You never expect a game of cricket to go that far in the final, but it did, and we just had the right people and the right tools there to sort of make it a memorable occasion, and that's the sort of thing you hope you'd be able to do at most games and serve a viewership.
But by the barest of margins.
By the barest of margins, indeed. And
to talk about and I really appreciated how you actually followed up on that recently in the Women's World Cup when Nasir Hussain met Ian Smith in New Zealand, and he gifted him that work of art from that final. Yeah.
I mean, we may or may not have engineered that roster just to make this piece possible.
Yeah, but it's great that you continued with that story, because that is what we as fans look forward to. It's not only a moment that happened, but keeping it alive in the imagination with a production like this.
I mean, it was begging to be done, to be fair. And,
yes.
And both of them have been pretty spectacular at our events. They're both two of the best commentators, really. And even in the all-time stakes, I mean, I'm sure they'll go down as very special commentators. And it's always been a privilege to work with them. And the great thing is how much they gave this Women's World Cup as well. Now, the thing is, the rostering for an event like the Women's World Cup is quite tricky. Rostering, in the sense, is figuring out which commentators to go with. Not every male commentator who's a good commentator otherwise will excel at this sort of event, because they really, and it's true for under-19 events, it's true for many events, actually, all apart from the senior men's events. You really have to sometimes do your homework and be familiar with players you might not have seen a lot of. And to their great credit, I think Nasir watches a lot of cricket. He watches a lot of women's cricket as well, and Spitty did as well. And they really did justice to this tournament, and neither of them were ever underprepared. It's one thing you're always a little scared of, that you'll have some of the talent coming across as less than prepared. You can't obviously get the perfect panel all of the time. You take some decisions. A lot of it will be right, some of it might not. But in this case, I mean, both of them gave a lot to the event, and really, they were really up for it.
Fantastic. I was just before the recording, I was telling Ajesh how two of my two girls, thoroughly enjoyed watching the matches from the World Cup, and how there are two new women's cricket fans now in this world. And thanks to the broadcast and watching it and seeing it, and hopefully someday we'll watch more cricket. We'll hopefully maybe even play it, and who knows? It could all have begun with Women's World Cup. So thank you for that, and thank you for making the viewers really understand the women's game better. Because there was this, I'll give you an example. There was this montage when India played West Indies. There was this brief montage of century scored by Trish Kamini in a previous edition of the World Cup, and to just see. Yeah, and to just see, the celebration of that in this event, and to talk about it, and then to see Kamini herself tweet about it. And, there is a certain lovely sort of community of cricket that develops because of that, and people begin to appreciate past cricketers that much more. So, yeah, thank you for bringing in the history of the game while covering the present as well.
Glad to hear that. I'll be asking for your feedback for our future events as well from your two little girls.
Oh, absolutely. Some of it may be quite blunt, but I think you won't mind that.
That's quite all right. But this is the sort of praise we live for. This is the sort of, anecdotally at least, you want to hear how people are influenced by this, and how this was a start in the cricketing journey of kids, basically. And just so glad that some of our events actually managed to do that.
Yes, this was wonderful, Ajesh. Thanks so much for joining. Thanks so much for sparing all this time. I'm sure our listeners would greatly benefit from understanding what happens behind the scenes. And I have definitely learned so much more about cricket broadcasts than I knew before. And, I'm actually quite piqued to learn much more and talk to more people and to read up more about all that happens. So thanks again for joining.
Thank you, Siddhartha. Very kind, and thanks for this opportunity as well.
Fantastic. Hopefully we'll have you again at some point. I'm sure there'll be so much other things to talk about, and all the best. Meanwhile, for our listeners, the usual call out, 81allout.com is our website. Please rate and review our podcasts wherever you listen to them. We're also, as you know, been getting into book publishing now. We published Mike Marques's War Minus the Shooting, originally published in 1996. We republished it recently, so you can pick it up, on Amazon or anywhere else. I'll put the link. And spread the word. And we'll hopefully join you soon for the next episode. Thank you.
Back for the second. India have won the Test match. India have won the series. They're going to get back for two. India home. Lords goes wild.